The night the tension began, the sky had opened up softly, rain drifting down like whispers. I lay awake beside him, listening to the steady patter against the window. My husband's breathing was familiar, almost soothing at first, but something in his rhythm felt distant. He'd been preoccupied lately. Long days at the office, half-hearted conversations about dinner or errands, a phone permanently in his hand. He wasn't angry or unhappy. He was just elsewhere. I shifted under the covers and glanced at the clock. 1:17 a.m. Too late to talk, too early to sleep. My thoughts wandered back to earlier that day, the way he avoided my eyes at breakfast, the distracted nod when I asked about plans for the weekend. I tried to shake it off, blamed it on stress or exhaustion. But every gesture itched with unspoken questions. Something had changed. Morning came slowly, the rain easing to a drizzle. I rose first, crept downstairs with a cup of coffee, and searched for calm in the steam rising from my mug. The kitchen was empty but already humming with soft domestic sounds. The fridge, the faucet, the hum of the light over the sink. That's when I noticed. The front door was slightly ajar. Strange. My husband always closed it firmly behind him. My pulse picked up as I crossed the hallway. Footprints on the rug, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the entrance. I closed the door. Locked it. Something wasn't right. Something had shifted and I couldn't ignore it. Fast forward to mid-morning. I had errands. Groceries, dry cleaning, picking up the kids from school. My husband said he was heading into the city for a client meeting. He kissed me goodbye. Quick, habitual, absent-minded. I noticed how automatic the gesture had become. Lips pressed on cheek, eyes still on phone. Once he left, the house felt hollow, the air thick with tension. I forced myself to focus. I made a shopping list, clipped on my coat, grabbed my keys. But I felt watched, even when alone. In the car, I tried to distract myself with music. But 15 minutes into the drive, my phone rang. I recognized the number but hesitated before picking up. Hello. Mom. The voice on the other end was hesitant, distant. My daughter's friend Brian calling me? At 11 in the morning? My heart skipped. Yes. Is Dad there? You're not answering. My stomach sank. Where are you? Meg's being silly, he stammered. She wanted me to prank you and say, never mind. He hung up, leaving me blinking at the screen. The absurdity unraveling with every second. I parked at the grocery store with trembling hands. Navigated through aisles, selected food, paid. All the while, thoughts circling. What was going on? Was I overthinking? Paranoia? Fear? That afternoon, I picked up my daughter. On the drive home, she was quiet, watching me. Finally, she sighed, exhaled through the corners of her lips and asked, Mom, why does Dad look at me funny lately? Look at you, funny? Like, I make him nervous, she said softly. Like there's something he's hiding. My chest tightened. I asked more, but she only shrugged. I don't know. He seems off. Evening came. I tried normal. Dinner, homework, bedtime routine. But everything felt fractured, like reflections on broken glass. My son collapsed into bed, yawning, trusting. Then he said goodnight and paused. Mom, Dad was on the porch last night. Upstairs window. He was outside. Outside my bedroom window. Outside while everyone slept. My words caught in my throat. He said goodnight? No. He just watched me. My heart thumped, breath shallow. My son sounded scared. I promised him Dad wasn't there, but the knot inside me tightened. Later, when the house was silent again, I crept back downstairs. The front door was locked. Windows closed. Nothing to indicate someone had been wandering outside. I went to bed in a daze. My husband was already asleep. I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling as thoughts roamed. Did he really step outside to watch our children? Was he in the house when he said the city meeting? Or was I missing something? What if something else was going on? Something I couldn't yet see. That night, I whispered under my breath in the darkness, "Take it easy, son." The words slipped out as a prayer or a warning or confession. For me, not him. Because I realized the person I was next to was still my husband, but the connection between us, that had been broken. Hope flickered that it was temporary. But the questions kept piling up. Had he changed? Were we changing? Or did I finally need to see what was hidden behind his eyes? That was the night everything shifted, without confrontation, without pounding fists. The change came in whispers. And this is where our story truly begins. I woke up that morning before the sun had even begun to stretch across the windows. The silence in the house was deep, almost like it was holding its breath. I lay there for a while, watching the ceiling fan turn slowly, listening to the soft ticking of the clock by my bedside. I could hear light snoring from the other room, a reminder that the house wasn't empty, even if it often felt that way. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to disturb the stillness. The kitchen tiles felt cold beneath my feet, and the coffee machine sounded louder than usual. As I sipped from the warm mug, I leaned against the counter, staring out the window, trying to make sense of the thoughts swirling inside me. Thoughts I had been ignoring for too long. He came into the kitchen not long after, hair a little messy, wearing a t-shirt that looked like it hadn't seen a drawer in weeks. He looked sleepy but alert, like someone used to waking early for school or work. "Morning," he said, voice hoarse. "Morning," I answered, trying not to let anything show in my tone. He poured himself some coffee and stood beside me. It was strange how comfortable the silence was between us. Familiar, even. That kind of silence doesn't grow overnight. It takes time and unspoken moments to build. "I was thinking about fixing the shelf in the hallway," he said after a pause. I nodded, grateful for the normalcy of his words. "It's been leaning for months. I'd appreciate that." He smiled faintly and took his mug with him into the living room. I followed after a moment, my eyes catching on the slight curve of his back as he crouched to inspect the shelf. I hated that my eyes lingered. I hated that something so simple felt so complicated. The shelf was filled with family photos, some turned slightly askew. I knelt beside him to hold it steady while he worked. Our hands brushed as he adjusted the bottom edge, and neither of us moved away immediately. Second too long, maybe. But enough to notice. "Sorry," he murmured. I shook my head. "It's fine." He finished the repair in silence, then stood and stepped back. "Looks better." "It does," I said, but I wasn't looking at the shelf. He met my gaze for a brief second, but it felt like longer. Then he turned away and went to the garage, leaving me standing there alone with a shelf that no longer leaned but somehow felt heavier. The day passed in slow pieces. I busied myself with laundry and organizing drawers that didn't need organizing. Anything to keep my hands moving and my thoughts quiet. But thoughts don't stay quiet forever. Later I found him on the back porch. He had headphones in, music low, staring out at the backyard like it held answers he was waiting for. I sat beside him without asking, and he removed one earbud and offered a small nod. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of quiet that settles between people who aren't strangers but aren't sure what they are anymore. The wind was soft and the sound of rustling leaves filled the space between us. "Do you ever wonder how things got so complicated?" I asked, not really expecting a response. He took a moment before answering. "All the time." I looked at him then, and there was something raw in his expression. Not guilt. Not shame. Just honesty. A kind of tired truth that we both carried. "I never planned for this," I said, barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied. It wasn't a conversation. It was more like a mutual understanding, spoken without needing full sentences. We were both trying to stay upright in a story that had quietly shifted around us. He stood up after a few minutes and stretched. "I'm going to help with dinner," he said. I followed him into the kitchen where we moved around each other in familiar steps. Chopping, stirring, seasoning, every task shared without words. At one point our hands met again over a drawer handle. This time neither of us apologized. When the food was ready, we sat at the small table by the window. The sky outside had turned a deep orange, fading into purple as the sun disappeared. It cast long shadows across the table, painting us in soft lines. "I used to think quiet dinners meant something was wrong," he said suddenly. I looked at him. "And now? Now I think sometimes people are just too full to speak. Not with food. With everything else." I nodded, not trusting my voice. We finished eating and washed the dishes together. I dried as he rinsed, and when our arms brushed, I didn't step away. I didn't lean in either. I just stayed still, caught in the middle of knowing and not knowing. That night, the hallway felt longer than usual. I stood outside my room, hand on the doorknob, heart beating louder than seemed possible. I could hear the television on in the living room, a low hum that felt oddly grounding. He passed by on his way to his room. We exchanged a glance. Just a glance. But it carried everything: questions, warnings, regrets that hadn't even happened yet. "Good night," I said. "Night," he replied. And that was it. But it wasn't. I lay awake for hours, the ceiling fan spinning the same slow rhythm above me. I wasn't restless. I was aware. Aware of how things were changing. Not with a crash, but with a quiet shifting of space, of glances, of moments too long and silences too full. Somewhere between midnight and morning I finally drifted off. My dreams were strange, full of light and doors that wouldn't stay shut. When I woke it was still dark and the world outside hadn't started moving yet. And somehow that stillness felt louder than ever. I woke the next morning to the smell of brewed coffee and the sound of quiet movement downstairs. It was earlier than usual, too early for a weekend. I sat up slowly, sunlight creeping through the blinds in faint lines across the bedspread. For a moment I thought I was alone in the house, but then I heard the faint clink of dishes and the soft hum of music from the kitchen. I wrapped myself in a robe and walked down the hallway, each step slower than the last. As I approached the kitchen I saw him standing there, already dressed, hair still damp from the shower, sleeves rolled up as he flipped pancakes with a focus that felt almost exaggerated. "You're up early," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He turned his head and smiled, not startled. "Thought I'd return the favor for once." I smiled faintly and leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." There was something simple in the way he said it. Not loaded. Not heavy. But it hung in the air between us anyway. I moved to help without being asked, reaching into the cabinet for plates, pulling out utensils, moving slower than necessary. He watched me out of the corner of his eye as he plated the pancakes, his gaze never lingering too long, but never entirely looking away either. We ate in the quiet, save for the occasional clink of forks or sip of coffee. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing the windows with a soft, steady rhythm. After breakfast, I busied myself with laundry and sweeping, the kinds of chores that don't need doing right away but somehow feel urgent when your thoughts are loud. I heard him upstairs for a while, first pacing then silence. When I finally passed by his room to put away fresh towels, the door was half open. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, head slightly bowed like he was caught in thought. I paused, not sure whether to speak or leave quietly. He looked up. "You can come in." "It's okay." I hesitated, then stepped in slowly. I didn't mean to interrupt. "You're not," he said, then motioned toward the chair by his desk. "Sit if you want." I did. The room smelled like a mix of clean clothes and the faint trace of cologne. There were sketches on the desk he'd always liked to draw. It used to be cars, but now it was buildings, corners of rooms, still life, things that stayed still and didn't ask questions. He followed my eyes and smiled slightly. "Helps clear my head." "They're good," I said genuinely. "You've gotten better." "Time does that," he replied, then looked at me with a quiet seriousness. "Do you think we're crossing a line?" The question came out gently, not accusingly. It wasn't a trap. It was real. I took a long breath, keeping my gaze on the drawing in front of me. "I think we're standing near it." He nodded slowly. "And if it moves? Then we have to decide who we are before it does." There was a pause. A pause that lasted long enough to feel like it could turn into something else. But it didn't. "I'm not trying to make things harder," he said finally. "I know," I replied. We sat there a while longer, the silence not as comfortable as before, but still not unbearable. When I finally stood to leave, I rested my hand briefly on the doorframe. "Let's not forget who we are in all this." "I won't," he said. And I believed him. The rest of the day passed in stretches. Reading, cleaning, small conversations. He stayed mostly in his room, coming out now and then for water or food, always polite, always calm. But something was different now. It had shifted and we both knew it. Later in the afternoon, I found myself in the backyard tending to the small garden I'd abandoned weeks ago. The herbs had overgrown, the soil was dry, and the tomatoes were hanging too low. As I worked, I heard the door slide open behind me. He stepped out quietly, hands in his pockets. "Didn't know you were into gardening again." "I'm not," I said. "Just needed something to do with my hands." He crouched beside me and started pulling out weeds without asking. "I always liked the smell of basil." "It reminds me of summer dinners," I said. "Back when things were simple." "Were they ever really simple?" he asked, not looking at me. I didn't answer right away. Maybe not. But they felt like it. We worked until the sun dipped low, painting everything in gold. When we stood, our hands were dirty, our clothes smudged, but we didn't care. We stood there side by side, watching the garden look almost alive again. That feels better, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. Yeah, he agreed. Sometimes small things matter more than they should. When we went back inside, the light in the house had changed. It felt warmer, like the walls had softened in the quiet effort of shared work. I went to wash up, and when I came back down, he had set 2 glasses of water on the table without a word. We sat again like we had the morning before, but now with something unspoken layered between us. Not tension. Not even temptation. Just the weight of knowing. I think we need space, I said gently. He nodded. I was thinking the same. Not because I'm upset. Just to remember what we're doing. Who we are. Yeah, he said again, and for the first time he didn't sound sure. But he respected it. He stood, picked up his glass and said, I'm going to go for a drive. Clear my head. Be safe, I said, meaning it more than I realized. When he left, I sat in the silence, the house once again echoing with the soft creaks and groans of stillness. But this time I wasn't confused. I knew what I felt, and I knew it had to be handled with care. Because sometimes it's not just about what we want. It's about what we carry when no one's watching. And that kind of weight doesn't vanish. It only waits to be understood. He didn't come back that night. I kept telling myself not to worry, that maybe he was just driving around, clearing his head like he said. But the hours passed. 10. Then midnight. Then 1 in the morning. The house felt too quiet, too aware of his absence. I stared at my phone, checking for a message. Nothing. Every little sound in the night made me sit up. I turned the porch light on and off 3 times. Finally, just past 2 a.m., headlights swept across the living room walls. I didn't go to the door. I heard his key in the lock, heard him step in quietly, pause, maybe wondering if I was asleep. I stayed in bed, eyes open in the dark, listening to his footsteps go up the stairs. The next morning, we both pretended nothing had changed. He was quieter. So was I. But we spoke like we used to, simple things, small observations. Did you eat? You going out? Do you need anything from the store? That kind of routine makes you feel safe, even when it's built on top of something fragile. I kept myself busy with work, chores, errands. Anything to distract from the tension I didn't want to admit was growing between us again. I thought space would fix things. But space only created distance. And that distance left room for questions. One afternoon, I found a photo tucked inside one of the books on the living room shelf. It was an old one. Back when he had just turned 16. He stood next to his father, who had his hand proudly on his son's shoulder. It was a rare moment. Both smiling, both unaware of the camera. A reminder of a different time. A different version of all of us. I stared at that photo for a long while. Not out of nostalgia, but out of guilt. I wasn't sure when I had stopped seeing him as just my husband's son. Somewhere along the line, things blurred. Too many late-night talks, too many shared silences, too much of everything that had no name. Later that week, he asked if I wanted to join him for a walk. It was a chilly evening. Leaves had started to fall, the air thick with the scent of earth and change. We walked side by side down familiar streets, not saying much at first. Eventually, he stopped by a quiet corner where a bench sat beneath a tree already half bare. Let's sit, he said. We did. He looked straight ahead. Do you ever think we made it worse by not talking about it? Maybe, I replied. Or maybe we kept it from getting worse because we didn't. That made me pause. Sometimes, I said, it's not about right or wrong. It's about not losing yourself in the middle. He nodded slowly. I think I did lose myself for a bit. I looked at him then. His face was more mature now. Not the boy who used to run down these streets. Not even the young man who had just moved back home. Something had changed in him. Something deeper. Have you thought about going somewhere? I asked gently. Some time away. A trip. A change. You mean leave? Just for a while. Maybe it'll help clear your head. He didn't respond right away. Would that help you too? I didn't answer. We both already knew. A week later, he packed a bag. He didn't say it was permanent. Neither did I. But the suitcase at the foot of the stairs said everything that words couldn't. We shared a quiet breakfast the morning he left. Just eggs, toast, and coffee. Nothing fancy. Nothing emotional. When he stood to leave, he gave me a long look. Not intense. Not pleading. Just a kind of understanding. Like we had both finally realized something we couldn't name and maybe didn't need to. Take care of yourself, I said softly. You too, he replied. Don't stay in your head too long. I'll try. At the door he hesitated. Then without saying anything he gently touched my hand. Not a grip. Not a goodbye. Just acknowledgement. And then he left. I stood there in the quiet that followed, unsure how to feel. Lighter? Lonelier? Maybe both. Days passed. Then weeks. The house settled back into its old rhythm. I worked, I cleaned, I called friends I hadn't spoken to in months. I tried new recipes. I even started journaling, something I hadn't done in years. One evening I found myself sitting on the back steps, watching the sun fall behind the trees. The wind was cool, brushing the skin on my arms, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for a door to open. I wasn't listening for footsteps upstairs. I just sat. So present. Reflecting. Because when everything quiets down, what remains is the part of you that's honest. The part that knows what happened without needing to label it. The part that forgives not just others, but yourself. And in that moment I realized something. Not every connection needs a conclusion. Some exist only to teach you about your own boundaries. About your heart. About your strength. And when you learn to respect that lesson, you start to breathe again. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. A month passed. Maybe more. I stopped counting the days after a while. It was easier that way. No anticipation, no lingering questions. Just the rhythm of my own footsteps through the hall, the quiet tap of rain on windows, and the hum of a home that no longer carried the weight of unsaid things. My husband returned from his business trip as if nothing had shifted in his absence. He kissed me lightly, unpacked his bags, asked about the house, about the neighbors, about the usual. He didn't mention his son. I didn't bring him up. It was as though we had agreed, silently, to maintain a version of the truth that was easier to live with. Some truths are like that, too heavy to carry openly, so we fold them up and tuck them away in the corners of our minds. One night, over dinner, he told me about a potential job relocation. Something quieter, smaller. A town a few hours away. He asked me what I thought. I don't know, I said honestly. Do you want to go? He shrugged. Maybe a change would be good. He wasn't wrong. That week I started sorting through old drawers, things we'd collected over the years. Receipts from forgotten weekends. Birthday cards. Photos of smiles that used to feel natural. When I opened the drawer in the hallway, I found his son's old notebook. The leather-bound one he always carried, half filled with sketches and half-formed ideas. I hadn't meant to open it, but my fingers moved on their own. The pages were filled with quiet thoughts. Observations. One line stood out. Some connections aren't meant to last forever. But that doesn't mean they weren't real. I closed the book and pressed it to my chest for a moment. It wasn't about regret anymore. It was about understanding. Later that weekend, while cleaning the garden, I found the old wind chime he had fixed for me. It had broken during a storm last year. He'd taken the time to fix each piece with gentle hands. I remember the way he'd smiled as it rang again, soft and uncertain in the breeze. I rehung it on the porch. That night, the sound of it in the wind felt like a memory brushing against the present. Not loud, not jarring, just there. Lingering. Days grew shorter. Autumn bled into early winter. The trees turned bare again, the air full of wood smoke and the smell of change. I wrapped myself in thicker sweaters. I took walks alone now, through streets that once carried echoes of another set of footsteps beside mine. One afternoon, while sorting through emails, I saw his name in my inbox. My breath caught, but I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, unread, glowing with quiet weight. When I finally clicked, the message was short. Hey, just wanted to say I'm doing okay. Working part-time at a workshop near the coast. Fixing up old boats, believe it or not. It helps. I hope you're doing okay too. I think about you sometimes. About how everything felt when I was home. I'm not writing to stir anything up. Just wanted to let you know. I'm finding my way. Hope you are too. I stared at the screen for a long time. No tears. No dramatic reaction. Just a strange warmth in my chest. Like closure or the beginning of one. I replied simply. I'm glad you wrote. And I'm glad you're finding your way. Things are quiet here. But sometimes quiet is good. Take care of yourself. Be safe. I didn't expect a reply. And he didn't send one. That was okay. We had said what needed to be said. A few months later, my husband and I moved. A smaller town, quieter streets, fewer memories. The new house was simpler, one floor, a wide porch. I filled it with new things. A different couch, lighter curtains, a dining table without old scratches. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about making space for who I was now. Some nights, when the wind rustled through the trees outside, I still thought of him. Not with longing, but with a kind of respectful tenderness. Like remembering a book you once read that changed you even if you never read it again. He had been a moment in my life that I hadn't planned for. A mirror that reflected parts of me I hadn't looked at in years. And now, having faced them, I felt more whole. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because I had faced the truth of what it meant to be human, to feel, to falter, and to grow. Sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is walk away quietly from something that almost became something more. And sometimes, it's in that almost where all the meaning lives. Now, when I look at the sky just before dusk, when the light is soft and uncertain, I feel peaceful. Not because I've healed completely, but because I've accepted the path I took to get here. And in that acceptance, I found freedom. Not from him, but from the parts of myself that once felt lost.